Hello, class. Welcome back. Today we're going to finish the four subfields of anthropology. And so today is session 4 of part 1. Today we will cover cultural anthropology, which is what the rest of the class will deal with. So let me go to the slide and we'll start. I'm also going to end with showing you a visual example. Okay, so a quick review of cultural anthropology. Cultural anthropologists are interested in looking at how humans pass on behaviors, how they pass on thoughts and way of life, how these ideas and behaviors are learned rather than genetically transmitted. Now remember, we looked at biological anthropology, and they are interested in looking at the genetic aspect of human and what relation this has to life, to human life. But cultural anthropology, we understand that we are constantly producing culture. We are producing it and reproducing it. So humans, we're constantly creating culture and passing it on. And again, one of the things about cultural anthropology is understanding that no culture is above another. So as we look here, we do not believe in cultural hierarchies. Even if one culture is completely different and from our reality, from our viewpoint, their practices, could be completely from what we are used to and our ethics and our belief systems. If a cultural anthropologist, when you are interested in learning about a culture, you must dive into it with being very humble, understanding that you do not know everything about what you are about to learn, about what you're about to see. You must approach it with a very, very open mind idea in order for you to be able to understand what is going on. And so one of the things, the basis of understanding what culture is, we know it's learned, we know we share it, we know it's socially transmitted. And so these ideas and thoughts, how do we transmit them? We have symbols, we have values, we have language, we have behaviors that help humans pass on this information to others. And in many cases, these are forms that their ancestors have developed, their behaviors that have developed in many cases to adapt to their environments or to give meaning to life. So I'll present a couple of examples of how we dive into understanding a culture. These are two of the most important methods that we use. And the first one is ethnography. And I highlighted in green the word graphy because that will give you a clue to distinguish them, which means writing. Graphy, writing. This is where we dive into the field, and I'll explain how we do field work and observation, but this is where we dive into the field. We are physically there to have a detailed description of the culture. And we also step out and we're able to do ethnology. Ethnology, and I highlighted ology, which means study. And here, this is where we do our comparative analysis. We step back and we're looking at different cultures and seeing where we can find similarities, where we can find similarities to help us understand these patterns that we are looking at. This is more of the scientific application of being able to understand the cultural practice that we're looking at. So we use both methods. Both go hand in hand, both are equally important to create comparative studies where we want to know what makes people different and what we share in common with other humans. So by doing ethnology, we're doing the research, right? We're trying to get the comparative perspective. But when we're doing ethnographic studies, when we dive in, when we become part of the community or part of the people that we are studying, we are trying to get the emic, which is the inside perspective. We're trying to understand the system, how things are learned, how things are transmitted, what is a reality, how they view reality, and we do this by doing participant observation. We are there. We are physically there. When I go into theories, when we start looking at the beginning of how anthropology came about, it was really, academics looking at memoirs and trying to piece together how people were without actually even being there, without actually viewing them with their eyes or firsthand experience. They were trying to piece together the reality without understanding it. But this is where anthropology has changed, and we are participants. We do field work. We get the inside perspective. Now, we all must always remember that nonetheless we are academics and we are scientists, and we need to step out and be able to also get the outside view, and this is called the ethic. This is where we do our comparative studies. This is where we are trying to, in many cases, and I'll present an example, we're trying to solve a human problem or maybe answer a question. These two methods as well go hand in hand to remind us that we are trying to comprehend and understand something rather than look at it romantically. Because when we look at something, for example, if we're studying a culture and we really find a lot that we want to integrate from, borrow from their knowledge, we have to be very conscious that we are still observers and that there is no utopia that we have found yet, or there's no utopia of human culture. Remember, we don't put one culture above another, a hierarchy. Like this is the perfect form of to be human. Want to avoid being romantic or and forget that we are scientists. Okay. All right. So this is an example of ethnography. This is what distinguishes this application are the methods that we use, and one is field work, where we live extended time at our research site or area or with a group of people that we're trying to study. In my case over here, you could see that there's a social gathering, and I lived in the Yucatan for years at a time, sometimes only a summer. In other cases, I spent a year at a time there with, using various grants, research grants. My last stay there, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the class, I lived about a year and a half, 2012, until we relocated back to Texas. And so conducting field work, being there for an extensive time to know the area, be able to socialize with people, and be able to do participant observation to get the inside view of life. It's not so much showing up I was interested in, I worked with a local Mayan priest. I worked with grassroots organizations, nonprofit organizations of Mayan activists. and also tourist people that had a particular niche in tourism, a spiritual tourism, new age tourism, and so in all three interests of groups of people, I was able to live there long enough to be able to socialize with them, not only from be able to get interviews, but be able to spend time with them outside of the interview process, be able to participate with them in their gatherings and socialize. In this case, this is one of my informants that passed away last year. He lived to 105 years old. This is Don Hermes, and he invited us to stay at his property. This is his house behind there, and we were very honored and blessed to have this opportunity to stay there, to live there, to be able to see how they live everyday life, see the topography. Don Hermes, I met him when he was about 85 years old, and he was completely independent, until 105. He passed away of old age, no illness or so forth. But his land, the topography, it was very rocky, very hilly. They had one faucet to have access to water. This was used to bathe. We would bathe with buckets, used to wash dishes, etc. The restrooms were really the open field. Therefore, so it was towards the end of his life that the municipality of his town, because it grew so much, they finally built him a restroom where he could shower, to have access to water and so forth. But nonetheless, we were able to socialize with him, accompany him in his ceremonies and his rituals and his cleanses, how he treated the community and so forth, receiving clients. But we also spent time with him on his everyday social everyday way of life. And one of the things it's very important in the Yucatan Peninsula is Sundays. Sundays is the day where people get together, where people gather, where people drink, where people make meals and invite either family members or neighbors or friends. As for us, perhaps it's Friday or Saturday that the socialization starts. Because a lot of people may not work on the weekend. In the Yucatan Peninsula, it's Sunday, and this is also very true for my family, which is also down south in the peninsula, in the next state of Campeche. Sundays are the socialization day, and it starts very early. Okay, so I will go into my findings and my research questions later on, but today I'm going to present a very famous study, and also so you can view, sometimes what extents anthropologists go to try to understand, in this case, a human problem. And right here you could see this is Philip Bourgeois. He's a anthropology professor at UCLA. His work is very famous because he did a photoethnography where he lived at certain times. He camped out among homeless people. His research questions were interested in understanding the logic and looking at the public health issue of heroin addicts and crack users, and also crack dealers and heroin dealers. His work in his book, The Righteous Dopamine, he looked at trying to answer the question of, okay, the first question was, has our public health system not done enough to promote information that if needle sharing can bring about great illness such as HIV, hepatitis, staph infections, what are the consequences of using these drugs and so forth. So these diseases are very, very pronounced in these communities, among the homeless, but in particular among the homeless drug users, because it comes down to sharing needles, doing these injections at very poor, dirty locations, very unhealthy, unsanitized locations. And so therefore there's a higher risk of infection, a higher risk of transmitting these diseases. And so in his field work, working with one of his students, which is a photographer, they were able to work with, two cities in Philadelphia and the other in San Francisco. And they camped out, stayed among the homeless, and socialized among the drug users. And he presents all the, the complexity of it from how, they get their drug, the dealers, how there's friction between them, how, how there's always like the survival mechanism, just the dynamics of them getting along, stealing from each other, etc. But going back to his main question that deals with public health, and so why is there such increase in needle sharing and diseases in these cities among these users? Well, one of the things that he observed were these encampments, homeless encampments would spring up. These cities have a zero tolerance for encampments for homeless and also drug users. So these campsites were in the city or wherever they were, and the police would raid them. So when the police would raid them, this is where they would have to obviously run, hide, and in many cases they were not able to take their things with them, their personal belongings. And in some of these personal belongings, they have new syringes or their drugs, because these are surprise raids, obviously, and they have to escape there to avoid being prosecuted and arrested. And this is where needle sharing increases, because as they hide and escape the situation, this raid, they quickly find, they obviously, they know who are the drug users among them, and they quickly seek out and find each other. And those that were able to escape with their drugs and their syringe, they share what is the last of what they have, the leftovers of the drug. They will share that with others. So there is where we're getting the needle sharing and so forth. And he's asking, do they not know that they're at high risk of getting these diseases? Do they not have the logic of understanding what risks they are taking in sharing these needles? And what he found is that, yes, they are very well aware of the risks that they're taking. However, the risk of going through withdrawal for them is much higher than when they weigh out the risk of getting a disease, an illness, an infection. So for a heroin addict, a crack user, going through withdrawals is much, for them, their logic and the way they feel is much, much worse than risking their lives and getting a disease or an illness. And this is also why they also run and escape being detained by the police, because in many cases, this is a misdemeanor, or they'll put them in jail for a short period of time before releasing them. But during this time that they are in jail, they undergo withdrawal. So for them, being able to get access to the drug supersedes, it has priority over everything else. And so Philip Bourgeois brings, once he gathers this information, he also steps out and does comparative studies with other countries and other places that have what they call safe injection sites, overdose protection sites. And he presents, these locations, how they open up these facilities in areas where there is a high use of these drugs. And these facilities are, they could be, they're clean facilities, probably with cubicles in between, where a person can go and, bring their own supplies. And if they don't have a clean syringe, they're provided with a clean syringe. And they are able to inject themselves there. There's a nurse on site in case of an overdose. Now this, when he presented this information, countries like Australia, Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, amongst others, have these sites, and their results demonstrate that there's a reduction in these diseases, which becomes a part of public health. If you have someone, with HIV and hepatitis and staph infections, and this is increasing in a high population, you also risk the risk of other people getting infected, even if they're not drug users. So this becomes a public health crisis in the United States. And Philip Bourgeois also brings other things to the attention of, okay, we're the wealthiest country in the world, yet we still have a lot of what we call structural vulnerability, which is based on your economic class, access, if you have access to healthcare, and who in the public sphere, who the public would view should have access to healthcare. So the debate starts, and it's continuous here in the U.S., thinking, should we provide safe injection sites for the homeless, for heroin users to use? And in the U.S., it's not something that has been accepted or taken lightly. As a matter of fact, just until 2021, Rhode Island is the first to legalize injection by providing a safe injection site. Again, the idea is trying to avoid these situations where people are sharing needles, living in sharing or injecting in these conditions, these very, unsanitized, unhealthy locations, because they don't want to get caught. And so if these sites are provided, we would reduce such infections among the population. Okay? All right. Other examples of how cultural anthropology has been applied to solve human problems. Over here we have a medical anthropologist working in Africa, and this study goes back, from the 80s, where there was a high increase in HIV, in Africa. And at that time, infrastructure, medical facilities, doctors, so forth, were not available to, within the region. As a matter of fact, there would be about There would be much less doctors. It would be healers outnumbered doctors 100 to 1 in the region. And so this anthropologist, Susan Lecker Malan, I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing her name completely wrong. She did work among traditional healers because they were the ones at the front line when people were getting ill, people were getting sick, and this disease kept spreading. They would go to the healers, and the healers, the way they view illness is they would view that the person had some sort of pollution in the body that was making them ill. Because illness is associated with pollution, and this pollution could be as a result from sorcery or just having first in one way or another having contracted this illness to bring pollution, or what they would call a dirty body. Now, the way here, in trying to understand how healers were dealing with this, we have to understand their cosmological beliefs and their spiritual beliefs. And the way, for example, if there's an illness like with a kidney, where the person is having issues with the kidney, having pain in that area, or problems urinating or so forth, the healers interpret it as you have dirty, this organ, this area right here has pollution, it has dirt. And then in cases, they approach it with herbs, with cleansing herbs, with local medicine. But in the case of what was taking place at this time, and the rapid spread of AIDS at this time in Africa, anthropologists realized that while healers were at the front line of this disease, the way they were treating it is that they would use porcupine quails or razors, and they would be making cuts on the body to release that energy, that pollution in that part of the body. What they would be is, in many cases, they would also bite that area of the body to release the energy or the ill spirit that is making the body sick. So from here, anthropologists were able to conduct field work. And remember, at this time, healers outnumbered doctors. There was not the infrastructure in place to be able to, even if people wanted to carry out assistance, provide medical assistance to people. So in these cases where anthropologists were called upon to do field work and work with the healers and educate the healers without understanding that they're not going in there to change their cosmology, the way they view things, the way they view illness, but try to make a difference in making a change that could be integrated within them, educating them on how this illness, this new disease could be transmitted to them, how they were at risk as well, or how they were at risk of transferring, this pollution to another person by using the same razors, by biting the person, by using these porcupine quails to poke at the person, kind of as a type of acupuncture. You could think about that. But so they encouraged people to bring their own razors, to bring their own needles, like to bring their own form for the healers to use, and as form, to stop this practice, to reduce the spread of AIDS. And then in this research, they also discovered that the herbs that the healers were using were bringing great relief to the symptoms, and they were immune boosting herbs that were helping people. So until the infrastructure expanded and people were able to access treatment, for now the healers were the main source of help. And so anthropologists help them change those practices without changing their complete worldview of the body and how they view illness. Okay, another example of anthropologists that try to solve that try to solve a human problem is this book and this research done by Margaret Lock. Margaret Lock was interested in looking at the from a public health perspective, and also from the issue of organ donation, and in looking at the population among Japanese and North Americans. And in Japan, organ donation was very low, and as opposed to here in the United States. And so her research dealt with doing a comparative study of why in this culture there was such a low participation in organ donations once a person dies. And one of the things that she brings to light is where the difference in for example in Western medicine and among not all but the majority of people from North America, where we view that the person's essence resides in the body, and where we view that the person's essence, personality, way of being resides, we view it in the brain. So when a person in the US reaches a point where the doctors will inform the family that the person is brain dead, that living on this life support machine is probably not recommended because a person's brain function has ceased, then the family of that person feels a lot more reassured that it's okay to let them go and be able to donate their organs as a part of giving a second life, where the organs carry out and help another person. Where in Japan, their idea of personhood is very different from how we view personhood in the US. Again, personhood in the US is kind of localized in the brain. The person is looked as an individual, as that person is no longer with us if the brain is not functioning, and therefore the family is able to let go of the body and give the gift of life. Now, in Japan, in 1997, the term brain dead was introduced, where they try to bring this concept that's here in the US to promote organ donation. And it was viewed with great opposition. It was not something that was acceptable and taken, integrated within the medical system, within their medical doctors, and within the public. Because in Japan, the idea of personhood, the idea of essence of the person resides in the whole body. So the body cannot be separated. It's not just located in the brain. It's in the whole person. And also in Japanese culture, the body does not necessarily belong only to that individual. It belongs to the family. So in a sense, the way they would view, even if a person lost function in the brain and would be considered brain dead, the person's essence and personhood is not gone. It's still alive within the body. So therefore, organ donation was not seen as something, that would be acceptable or done. And so again, education, and throughout time, until this day, it has grown in Japan, but it's still at a very low rate in comparison to the US. And this is where anthropologists are answering this question for, in this case, the medical field. Why do we see very low organ donations among, among the Japanese? Okay, all right. So last, we're going to finish up with an example of why culture is important. And as I've mentioned, with the other examples of applied anthropology, where anthropologists are there to help answer a question, answer either a public health question, a medical question, a behavioral question, and trying to make change. In this case, I'm going to present a video so you can have a visual of what happened to Lia Lee. And this is a case where we have a cultural misunderstanding, and how we learn how culture is very important to take into account in the medical field. This is a case that is medical students in Ivy League universities it's a required read, in particular, to learn to take into account how people view illness, how people look at language as something symbolic, as different ways to view reality, as different ways to view the body, in order to try to bridge together these gaps, bridge together, in many cases, these two worldviews among people to achieve what they both want, which is to reach health, to reach a state of equilibrium, to regain health. Now, this is a case of Lia Lee. Lia Lee was, she was from Laos, and this was during the Vietnam War, and they were allies of the U.S., and so they brought over many people from this region as refugees to the U.S. During this time. And Lia Lee and her family were among the refugees that were brought to California. And Lia was about 3 months old when they arrived to the U.S. And shortly after her arrival, she started demonstrating certain behaviors such as trembling and shaking, that the family, and I can't remember the details on how they ended up in the ER, who encouraged them or took them to the ER. But they went to the ER, and this is where the series of culture clash begins. So first, we need to go back and understand that this was in a time, we had an influx of refugees, and their culture is, their group of people is called the Hmong. And so there was an influx of refugees, in this case, California. There were no translators at this time. And during this visit to the emergency room, the doctors were unable to communicate with the family to be able to explain what is going on, and then vice versa, explain what they saw going on with their daughter. So there's, number one, a lack of translation, a lack of language, and remember when I gave that example, that I say, if you don't have a word for it, can you experience it? When I talked about the Alush, this nature spirit that's among the Mayas, that's a very much a reality in this region, in the whole entire peninsula. we don't know what that word means here, and therefore, how can we experience it? So it's lack of understanding the language, and lack of cultural knowledge that was taking place. So the way the doctors diagnosed her with epilepsy, um, and because she was having seizures. Now, having a seizure does not necessarily mean that you have epilepsy, but nonetheless, the doctors diagnosed her with that, and she was given a series of medication to take. Now, the way the family saw it is they saw the body shaking, and they interpret it as what they call quandam peg, which means when the body is shaking, it means that the spirit is about to leave you, is leaving the body, and it must be returned to the body. And therefore it's translated as the spirit catches you and you fall down. Now, to understand what this means for them, among the Hmong, to believe in Quandam Peg, it means that it meant for them that this was also a sign that Leah was destined to be a healer, because it is the healers, when they go in between the two worlds, when they go in between the human world, the physical world, and they shake, their body shakes. That is the point where they are entering the spirit world, and many times on behalf of people, to heal people. So that is why they thought Leah is destined to be a healer. But at this time, her body is shaking, and as it's shaking, it means the spirit wants to leave her. So the family did not administer the medication that was given to them. First, they did not understand it, and second, they were unable to communicate how they were viewing this illness to the doctors. So what they did is, among the refugees that came with them from Laos, they found healers and shamans, of what we would call them, and they sought out those practices and did not administer the medication. And so here in the U.S., we have what we call Child Protective Services. When a child is at risk, their health is at risk, their well-being is at risk, their environment or so forth presents some form of risk, that is where they would get involved on a state or local level. And that's exactly what happened to Leah Lee. How CPS got called or got involved, or who reported them, I'm not quite sure. Perhaps it was follow-ups or lack of follow-ups, or the doctors probably saw some sort of, they interpreted, or they saw the family not administering the medication as a form of neglect. Nonetheless, CPS got involved and took the child away. The family fought very hard and was able to recover the child. By the age of 4, so this started when she was 3 months old. So by the age of 4, she suffered a severe seizure that left her with brain loss, with lack of brain function, and she was paralyzed. The doctors told the family that she would not live very long. She would die. She would die very, very shortly after. Now, the case of Leah Lee presents a medical wonder in the fact that medically, Western medicine diagnosed her situation, her health condition, to not have many more months to live because of her state. But culturally, the family took care of her, and the community cared for her, providing for her, that she lived to the age of 26 years old, which was a medical phenomenon. And this is why her case becomes a case study in the medical field. A case study of, what could have been done from the get-go to perhaps maybe avoided her having this severe seizure at 4 years old. Understanding how the lack of communication the lack of translation, of understanding language as something symbolic, and being able to understand how the people are interpreting this and viewing the body, how they view illness. And so this is where, you know, they bring into account in the medical field that we must take into account culture. We must then take into account language in order to both work together to breach this cultural gap and avoid this cultural clash, as what happened in the case of Leah Lee. I'm going to present a video to give you a visual of how this community views illness. And this is also, these are terms that would also fall, concepts that we would also call forms of cultural bound illness. Remember at the beginning we talked about cultural bound. We're trying to avoid culture bound theory. That is where you just expect things to be the same everywhere you go in the world. And we gave the example of funerals, you know, that we expect for bodies to be treated this way and to be buried and to be, there be a visual and a funeral home and a cemetery, etc. The way they treat the body. And that's not the case. That happens everywhere else. So these are culture-bound theories that we just expect things to be so, you know, everywhere else. Well, culture-bound illness, these are illnesses that are specific to a culture because they believe in such, they have such a belief system of this occurring, that this is how they believe this is the cause and this is the way to treat it. Now, I'm going to present to you a visual of the Hmong culture and shamanism. And I'll play it for you, and if you want to view this on your own, here's the link to Canopy, and you just log in there. It's about 30 minutes long, and the title is Between Two Worlds, the Hmong Shaman in America. This falls in line with the case of Leah Lee because it's also, it also makes notes of the refugees and how they were dealing with illness, how there's a culture clash. I want you to look at these terms, try to define how they define shaman, process of enculturation. Remember how we pass on our culture, usually through parenting, through education, or so forth. How they pass on the view of illness and treatment and other examples that you'll see. Pay attention to their belief system, to symbols that you see, and also the culture clash, and what culture-bound illness you find within this culture. What are some illnesses that are specific to their belief system? All right. Okay, let's start the video. Adjust your volumes if it's too loud.
There was a time in the history of America when shamans lived across this land. People looked at animals as their relatives, believed that trees, mountains, and lightning were animate creatures, and talked to the unseen spirits. They celebrated their humanity as part of the circle life of all creation, caught up in the rotation of the seasons, the migration of animals, the reincarnation of life from generation to generation. Above all, they believed in the primacy of spiritual reality. Ordinary men and women needed a mediator to intercede with the spirits, someone who could go between the earth and the sky. They looked to their shaman, who lived in close touch with the sacred. The shaman was their only hope in time of sickness and trouble. When the white man came, he did not understand the way of the shaman. He had little tolerance for other beliefs about the natural and the supernatural. Many great traditions of Native American shamanism have been lost. But now the ancient art of shamanism has returned to this country with the coming of Southeast Asian refugees. A community of Hmong refugees now lives in Chicago's uptown neighborhood. They have brought their ancient traditions to this inner city crossroads of ethnic variety and cultural diversity. Displaced refugees from the war in Southeast Asia, they are America's most recent immigrants, still poised on the threshold between two worlds. As part of my research, I traveled to Milwaukee to do an oral history of a husband and wife shaman team. The wife in particular had a reputation for her knowledge of plant medicine and herbal healing. She had brought this ancient tradition of natural healing with plants from the mountains of Laos to her new home in America. She spoke for hours of specific remedies and cures, a way of healing she feared would be lost with the passing of her generation. As the night wore on, she told me that when she was a little girl, she had been kicked by a horse and blinded in the left eye. Then I told her that I was blind in my left eye. She began reading my palms, tracing the lines up my arms, and giving special attention to my legs. She told me that I had suffered a loss of soul, that the spirits of my lower legs had departed. Her husband could shake for me. At least I could approach the mystery of the shaman's power. Hmong believed the shaman's soul leaves his body when he shakes, and if it does not come back, he will die. The veil over his face signifies that he has left the side of reality that is seen and has entered the part that is unseen. The son supports his father, believing a shaman may die if he falls in performance. He is talking to the spirits, arguing and pleading, cajoling and commanding. The ring of rattles helps him capture fugitive souls. Now in America, they are afraid and saddened to think that this sacred way of the shaman could be lost. Cha Sheng is 22 years old. He has been in the U.S. for 5 years. Married and the father of 2 baby boys, he works at Burger King to help support his family while he studies chemistry at Chicago's Northeastern University. Cha's second son was born 2 months premature. While the baby's life still hung in the balance, the family quietly brought a shaman to the intensive care unit and told the family they should offer a cow to strengthen the soul of the dying baby. Like the American Indians, Hmong believed that human life and animal life are intimately connected. The souls reincarnate one into the other. All Boy Rescue's uncles and cousins join together to restore his soul. They raised the $500 to buy the cow, found an American farmer who let them use his place. Each relative had a hand in the ceremony. The uncle speaks to the spirit of the cow. He carefully explains that it has been chosen to give its strength to save the life of Boy Rescue. The shaman stands at the back door and calls back the soul of Boy Rescue. He hits the doorpost to guide the spirits through the opening, giving them over and over again the dimensions of the doorway. Softly calling and guiding the good spirits to the one back door that looks like all the rest, except for a cow's head, legs, and tail, carefully arranged on a plastic bag, overlapping the threshold, half inside, half outside. After the shaman called back the soul of Boy Rescue, he welcomed its return to the body of the little boy. Tying strings around the wrist helps hold and lock the new spirit inside the baby's body. we tied strings and spoke words of blessing.
This is to wish Cha Chang's little boy rescue, good health, good life. I hope his spirit is strong and he stays in the body.
Cha was deeply hurt that many of his relatives refused to come to the ceremony for his baby. They had been forbidden by a Christian minister to eat the meat of sacrificed animals. Cha is saddened by this split within the community and family structure, a religious tension that pits Christian converts against the Hmong who want to keep their traditional way of life.
I work with a local church in the area, and we've been visiting up here for a few years, visiting with the Hmong and Cambodian, Lao, Vietnamese people, and I really enjoy working with these people. It's my whole life is these people. We try to teach them every week, just a little bit more about Christ, about how he is the true living Son of God. And Buddhism is kind of like ancient history. It's just a piece of a rock that's molded out of a rock, and they've molded him, and they've made their own God, but our God made us, and we're trying to let the people know each week more and more how they can know the God that made them.
Pa Cha Tao, newly arrived shaman in America. He has been a practicing shaman for more than 30 years. Now he is thrown into an alien environment that is either indifferent or hostile to his sacred practice. Almost overnight, he went from respected leader to elementary student, struggling with the basics of literacy.
What did I see on the farm? Sheep. Sheep. Let me write sheep for you. Sheep. Do you know how to spell sheep? S-H. Can you say, can I smoke? Can I smoke? He says smoke.
He comes from an oral culture where all knowledge is shared by word of mouth, where history is carried through storytelling and legend. In Laos, they lived in a small farming village high in the mountains. Hmong houses are built so that the mountains can be seen from both the front and back doors. Seeing nature is not just a matter of aesthetics, it is a need of the spirit.
What religion do they have? They are usually characterized as animist. Actually, it is more than animism in the fact that they are gods too. They have a metaphysics, and in their metaphysics, in their theology, they have gods, tutelary gods of the house. Their traditions maintain a very ancient idea in East Asia that the soul of a man does not disappear after his death, but is going to reincarnate. And they go very far in this metaphysics, so far as to try to manipulate the destiny of the soul after death in order to have it come back into their own lineage group or in the family. Why that? Because soul means life. And if you want to keep life, you got to keep souls. All the shaman story is the story of the fight against the god of death.
Cái năng là mày thấu sâu là khiến mong ua năng là mà do ta lấy thổ u tê lầu mà do mong cái năng là mà do mong sâu kia sâu còn cả năng bông ruộng tiệt tê lần từ khởi tôi cho mà lần từ khởi tôi ua lần từ khởi tôi cho lần từ khởi tôi cho một ua cho một khai những công những hùa có cả bỏ của chỉ bỏ mà đại thì hậu chọn tông có cả bỏ của chỉ bỏ thì trở đi dùng môi cho đa năng để cuộc khía theo ta chỉ đồng hình quán đã thì đồng bà cha thế gì phía này nó gì cha để khó nó thôi cha nó thế là thế thế gì nữa gì
Pacha shakes for the first time in America. He is anxious to re-establish contact with ancestral spirits. Chickens are used to open the altar because they have special powers to see and know. That's why the spirit of a chicken is used as a messenger and guide on journeys to the spirit kingdom.
Hello, how are you all today? Is it okay if there's some candy?
nó phải
Fine, okay. Some candy? There you go. You want some candy? No candy today, huh? Okay. You want some? There you go. Oh, I know the boys always like candy, don't they? These people here, they seem to come to America and don't have any beliefs, and they're waiting for someone to show them how to believe. There's a void that they need filled, and they're just waiting for someone to fill it, and that's what we try to do. We try to teach them the ways of God. We teach them from the Bible, try to teach them the same way that Jesus, if he were here, how he would do it.
Christianity gives a very simple relationship of one individual to the supernatural, and if the individual is abiding the laws of God, he is entitled to be protected permanently, because you get a very easy ticket to peace and well-being. Because we have done things wrong, then we deserve to die and go to hell, because we've done things wrong. Is he a sinner? Has he done things wrong?
you chỉ bao
Yes.
tại chỉ nó cũng lâu nó mà cũng tao mua lấy ra cũng trò sọ bỏ thì cũng tao mua.
Tell them that we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same place. Every one of us has done things wrong. Tell them, I wish I had a Bible in his language, but the Bible is God's word, and it says that Jesus died for our sins. And everybody, his, ours, the whole world's. Jesus died for the whole world's sins. Does he believe?
When they have been converted, they are under the protection of God only. And when more they learn about Christianity, more they understand that God does not protect when you need it. He does it when he wants, and he may let you suffer. So this is the problem of guilt. They have to discover guilt, and they feel guilt on both ways, to have left their own tradition and to be in a queer position towards God now.
And bless us all who are gathered here at one day.
More than 80 Southeast Asian refugees have died mysteriously in their sleep since the first reported death in 1977. The Hmong people are the hardest hit ethnic group. The Hmong refer to this fatal syndrome as the sleeping death or sometimes the nightmare death. What is so terrifying about this fatal syndrome, which kills young men in their sleep, is that it is unexplained.
They go to sleep and just die. And by the time the family see it, the person is already died. Never get sick or never get ill.
Healthy men.
Healthy man, healthy person and die. So they call the Hmong's sudden death syndrome.
No medical research team to date has been able to find a cause for the sleeping death. The autopsy reports state, in fact, that there is no cause of death found at all. Researchers are looking more and more towards cultural and psychological issues. A major research team at the St. Paul Ramsey Medical Center in Minnesota has just completed its final report. They recommend that future researchers give serious attention to refugee stress, anxiety, tension, delayed grief, and culture shock as potential contributing factors. One of the Hmong leaders cited in this report states that many Hmong elders believe these deaths are caused by Hmong who no longer continue their traditional religious practices. The report states that these traditional ceremonies and shamanic rituals are therapeutic. It implies that the shaman has a crucial role to play, not just in the immediate crisis of sudden death, but in the long-term cultural adjustment of the Hmong people in America.
Hãy nếu về cho ra chữ đừng tê cho những cho chữ cũng chờ đợi lo chữ đừng lo trời về cho ra nhẹ và tuổi từng chơi một phan tử ra nhẹ và tuổi từng chơi một mang cũng đi trâu đợi lo chữ đừng lo hãy nếu về cho ra chữ đừng tê cho những cho chữ cũng chờ đợi lo chữ đừng lo trời về cho ra nhẹ và tuổi từng chơi một phan tử ra nhẹ và tuổi từng chơi một mang cũng đi trâu đợi lo trở từng lo ấy nhẹ ra đoàn tụ chia tí chia to đoàn tụ ra tí đoàn tụ chia tí trâu lời nó chi đi trở từng đó nó lo trâu hùng và ta phải lo trâu hùng đi chê
All right, we're stopping the video now, but this gives you a very visual culture and understanding of what the case of Liali, what their parents, what the family was going through, and how they view illness. And it also talks about the shaman and the way of when they shake, how it is that they are going in between two worlds, and if they are not, held, if they fall, they could die. So for them, Quandam Peg is returning the spirit back into the body. The way illness is viewed is the spirit is leaving the body. So these offerings, these ceremonies are done to bring the spirit back. All right, we'll stop there, and we'll pick up our next session with starting theory. If you have any questions, please, like always, email me. Thank you.